And with that, I'm going to say hello to everyone who's joining us via live stream and to all of you who are in the Zoom meeting with me. Thank you all for joining us. These Thursday evening Zoom meetups are the public facing part of the vidwheel Creator Network. And the vidwheel Creator Network is essentially a video support group. We use a separate closed social media and e-learning platform to teach you how to use your gear, provide a community of other folks that are building their businesses through video, with opportunities to learn strategy, technique, and other video-related skills so that you can increase your reach, your efficiency, and the profitability in your business. So if you find that intriguing and the content you hear tonight valuable and you want to grow your business through video, feel free to book a time. I'm popping it in the chat here. And it's also in the description for the live stream. Let's set up a time to talk video. So the live stream here is a great preview of what a vidwheel Creator Network Zoom meetup is like. But if you want to get the full experience, join us for our next meeting, which is on February 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern. We're kicking off our February theme of live streaming with a presentation by Chris Hughes called The Benefits of Live Streaming Your Personal Brand. In the description of the live stream, you can take a look at Chris Hughes and what he does. He does a lot of live streaming and content creation on LinkedIn. That event is published in the description of the live stream and also on our page, our company page on LinkedIn. So, with all that out of the way, it is still January, and we're continuing this month's theme of opportunities in planning. Opportunities for your business are everywhere, and sometimes it's hard to figure them out or how you might want to approach them, and sometimes you just need to know where to look. And Barb is here to help us find those opportunities in a talk tonight titled Emergency Taco Kits, Blue Oceans and Data Classification. Barb, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to the group. Are you ready?
I am. So thanks for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And let me know if that's coming up okay. All right. So basically, while the title sounds exciting, it's actually descriptive of what I'm going to talk about. So we'll start with some tacos and oceans. We'll tie it all back to video with examples. And then I really want to open it up to you to talk about, things that you're thinking about then based on what we've talked about here in your own applications and see if we can explore that a little bit. So emergency taco kits is actually something that came across my newsfeed really early in the pandemic. And it was just this thing that they were putting together food, and it also came with toilet paper and a very classic kind of pandemic thing. And it was just like, emergency taco kit, what is that? And if you think about that name even more, they're using all of these words in really non-standard ways, right? And so this is the mini version of it that they continued to sell. And it's an emergency taco kit, but you have to order it 48 hours in advance, right? And so not quite how we think about the standard of emergency of oh my gosh, I have a craving right now. No, you have to anticipate your craving 48 hours in advance. And when you think about a kit, right, normally you're thinking grocery store kinds of things hey, here's a bag of maybe some sauce or some chips, add your own chicken kind of thing. And so again, when you look at the picture, this is not at all in line with how we think about a standard kit, right? And so it breaks a lot of these naming conventions and naming rules. And what this really is in marketing terminology is what could be considered a blue ocean strategy. And if you're not familiar with this concept, it's this idea that what we all find ourselves in right now is a red ocean. So we're all sitting here trying to figure out, well, what's your niche? What's your differentiator? What do you have as an advantage over your competition? And all of these things are really cutthroat, right? And so while we're all sort of like edging each other out of the way, trying to siphon business off of each other, right, we're letting a lot of blood into the water. And so we're in a red ocean filled with our own blood, right? Kind of gruesome, but that's the thing. And so what you want to do is find a blue ocean, something that isn't all filled with blood and chum and everything else, this uncontested market space. And so a lot of times when we think about this, we're thinking about like, oh, well, now you're going to come up with a novel invention, something that people haven't ever seen before. Or, you know, the Nintendo Wii is a classic example where they took a non-standard video game controller and used that to differentiate themselves in the space. So they didn't really have any contenders at the time that came out. But the emergency taco kit does it in this other kind of way where they haven't really had to come up with anything new. If you think about the world of tacos, right? We get them from food trucks, from catering, from restaurants, from the grocery store, from grocery store kits. But when you think about where the emergency taco kit fits in that Venn diagram of the world of tacos, it's not so easy to fit it into a place, right? And so it creates a blue ocean for itself just through this naming convention, just through these labels, right? And so there's opportunity in that because our heads are actually sort of everything that we think about the world is arranged in sort of these Venn diagrams in our brains, right? And so when we're all sitting here trying to have this data classification experience with the things we know about the world, it's now uncontested. We can't be like, well, what about this other emergency taco kit? That's not a thing, right? Blue ocean. But this is not a marketing talk. I'm not a marketer. I'm a data wrangler. So let's talk about really our terminology and our labels and really what constitutes an opportunity for ourselves, right? And I'm going to say, you know, while that's a cool example with emergency tacos and blue oceans, it's not really the only way to think about opportunities. So you need to start asking yourself certain kinds of questions. And it's how might I classify or categorize these entities that I'm thinking about? And I say might because there's not a right answer. What you're looking for is different ways to play around with grouping things. What are ways that things have these shared characteristics or these shared functions or some other shared something that would put them into a group together, right? And you really want to play around with this. And what you're looking for is, well, if I group things this way, now what, right? What would be my next step? Because what you're really doing is framing the conversation. And I think we've heard a lot about this in terms of social construction and a lot of, you know, other social theory, where once we label something, it really shapes how we talk about that thing and how we think about that thing. And you're doing that same thing now with your opportunities when you give yourself that freedom to play around and you really push yourself to play around with, now what am I going to do with this thing? And that also has to go in line with, what am I trying to do here? And that's a goal thing and a strategy thing, because we can play around with all sorts of buckets and now do all sorts of fun and interesting things and like Google all sorts of stuff and, you know, make things up. But you know that you're trying to get to a certain place. You have a vision for your business of what you want that to look like. Well, you know, if I categorize things this way and explore this way, how does that help me think about that goal or different ways of getting to that goal, different strategies, different tactics, right? And so what we're talking about is labeling with a different kind of intention behind it. And so what we're really up against is our lazy historical buckets. And the ones we tend to sort of go along with are the ones like gender and race. And they're easy because they're visible, right? Whether we're right about how we're classifying people or not, right? It's easy to say things like all men X or all women X, or men tend to X and women tend to Y, right? And we have a lot of alternatives, but a lot of times we don't look past it. And that can be easy as well because of how a lot of these other analytics platforms that we rely on also will try to use those types of markers. But I would say as much as possible, try to look past that. If you're on something like LinkedIn, you can look at things like industry, right? Because you can go through, see who's engaged with your post, or those impressions, and look through by industry and see what's going on. Is there a differentiator there, right? Alternatives as well. If you look at people, you look at their professions, if you know those people, is there a professional or behavioral class that sort of explains how maybe their behavior differentiates themselves from other people that are responding? And I see this a lot when people are soliciting feedback, right? You look at this and you'll say pretty much every time people will be like, oh, well, more men gave me feedback and, that means blah, 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 right? But if you look a little bit deeper, sometimes you see, well, actually the people that gave you feedback aren't the men. Maybe they're the people that are used to giving feedback and professional advice. They're the people that are used to talking strategy with other people. And that's really what classifies them, right? Versus maybe transactional folks who are the people that are more like photographers and the people that just come in and out, that don't sit around with their clients and talk strategy as a rule. So it's just not that default when you've already now asked them for advice or left that option open for them, right? And so just sort of try to push yourself beyond that a little bit. And so this is a video network. So, that's a lot of generic stuff. I want to start now applying this more to video. And here are some examples. I don't know how many people have a YouTube channel here, but one of the things that sort of activates once your video has gotten over 10 views is this key moments for audience retention. And YouTube is really keen on this because what they care about is people staying on their platform, right? And so it's all about audience retention. And you can see, over the lifetime of your video, what happens is like 100% of people come in at the beginning, and over time they peter off. There are these spikes in the graphs that are indications that maybe people replayed a part. And there are dips that indicate that, well, maybe people skipped over that part or they've completely left your video, right? And YouTube wants you to care about this because they want you to help feed that algorithm and keep people on the platform more. And so you're like, oh, wow, this is good or this is bad. And you start crafting your content in response to their classifications and their end goals. But if I take a look at these, just these 4 that I picked off for here, I've got this one for improving data quality that has to do with standard operating procedures. And you can see where I've got the red line there. There's a pretty significant spike. Well, what happens there is I'm taking you through a whole work order facility maintenance example. And that's the point at which I give you the answer for how to solve the problem that I gave you at the beginning of the video, right? So that spike tells me people like answers, right? And if I go then to vision to action, turning ideas into measurable and actionable steps, things are kind of all over the place. And the place that I've marked it at the end tends to go up and down and, actually tends to be higher than that historically. And where that is where I'm like, download the free template, right? So super, what I learned about this is also, in addition to answers, people like free stuff, right? And so I can see in analyzing customer reviews, people made it to the end, but nothing really grabbed them in that one, right? And so it's like, okay, sort of landed, whatever. And how to use conditional field if then else. This is one of those things that I released as part of a teaser to my new course on using mail merge for data reporting. And that spike was 100% on the first day, has consistently gone over 100%, dipped down a little bit here when I got the screen capture, it's back over 100%. Something is happening here, right? So I went in and I looked at the video, and it's this point where I put something called a curly brace up on the screen. And if you're taking the course, I've already told you in a previous video how to get that curly brace on there. So when I get to this video, I don't tell you how. And so I'm like, in this video, I'm like, okay, and so then insert curly braces, and I put them in and I do the next thing. And people are like, wait, how did she just do this? Right. And they're rewatching and rewatching and rewatching, trying to figure out what I did to get those curly braces up there. Right. It's a total fail on my part and an opportunity to go back and take a corrective action. Right. And so there are different ways in this. Like if I know that people are into answers and free stuff and actually explaining things that I'm doing on the screen, right? I can take those and figure out how to craft different kinds of opportunities within those constraints as well. And so I can use this, this way that I'm getting something that's not a classification I want to use from YouTube, but use it now to find my own opportunities within that same data set. So, you can also find those different things. If you know what you're kind of looking for and you know what these things mean, there's a different way to sort of reclassify and play with that classification to figure out what those themes might be and what those opportunities might be. The second thing, and I think it is pretty much applicable to everybody in this room, is picking powerful nuggets from longer content. And in this one, you're thinking again, how you want to frame that conversation, what you're trying to do here. And if you think about podcasts and interview style podcasts, which is, I think, the format pretty much everyone is using, you've got a little bit of play based on who your guest is, but you've also usually standardized a set of questions that you kind of ask everybody, right? And it kind of helps you feed into that theme of, what ties all these episodes together. And you can think about that as data of, I ask about X, that question, and people talk about Y, right? And so you can go through and start taking notes by question on the types of things that people are coming up with. When you're looking for things like end of year content, in a kind of clip show kind of way, you can put together compilations of like, hey, when I've asked about this in 2021, these are the things that people were talking about. How did things change in 2022, right? And the longer you have this data, the more interesting stuff that you have coming up as well. So like, what are people struggling with? What are they celebrating? Like all of these different things will be changing over time. But even if you just do it for the past year because you couldn't book a guest, right? It's a really easy way to do it. It's also an interesting way to reflect back on assumptions that you're building into things that can push you into figuring out how to classify things differently as well and look for different opportunities. So you ask about X, maybe people say back D, E, and F. And you're like, wait, I'm expecting, A, B, and C. I just switched them from what's up there, but you get it. And so if you have that kind of mismatch, right, really take that opportunity to listen and figure out what that is that might be going on that's different, either from the way you're framing that question that's getting a different kind of response, or what's going on that you're so, set on having it be this one way, and people are really pushing back and answering in a different way. There's an opportunity for you in there to explore, to see if there's something else for you to capitalize on. And there's different software that you can use where you can just take those video transcripts and put them into what would be a text analyzer or qualitative data analyzer. And there are different ways to do that. If you're interested, we can talk about it. An even lighter lift is to just start adding chapters into your YouTube videos and those descriptions that help you mark out where those questions are. Flip through your videos, click on the questions, listen to what people say, take notes on paper, and just see what themes are emerging from that, right? And that can be a really, I think it's a kind of fun way to go through your data. And it's really rich data, right? Conversation data is always kind of the best because a lot of times those things are not scripted either. And so you're going to get a lot more what I would consider to be genuine or authentic responses as well in that data. And that can get you powerful nuggets to pull out, even if you're not doing the compilations. But when you share these things, when you take that snippet, you have to put that in context for other people. So it's cool for you and it struck you in a certain way because you've categorized that data in a certain way. And when you put that out there for the world, you can't just release that clip. You have to frame that conversation for other people as well, and frame that clip in line with that classification system that you're using. So this is important because, or listen to how I asked about this and people talked about X, Y, and Z, right? If you highlight that, that makes people better able to hear those things as well. And now you can get setting the tone for a different kind of conversation when you share that out on social media as well. And that's one way that you get that opportunity of reusable content, right? Because that innovation, that opportunity can just mean existing things in new ways, in addition to labeling things in a way that's non-standard, that sets up that uncontested space. But you can get the podcast compilations, you can get the nuggets and context for social posts, and you can also use these labeling opportunities when you put this content up again in blog posts, which I would recommend that you do. It's a really easy thing. You can just embed that, throw in your transcript, you've got a free blog post. Maybe you tweak it a little bit for SEO, and also use the categories and tags. So categories, those big hierarchical kinds of things that might line up with your products or actually, service areas, estate planning, whatever else you do, those would be your big ones. And then your little things, that would be just the tags that come up, the other small topics like, and here I'm talking about also coffee, right? So you don't want to categorize all the things that have coffee like a big category unless you're a coffee maker, but maybe all those other little things that help people differentiate again. And as you're thinking about this as well, from an SEO standpoint, it's one thing to internally make up names that, help you and frame the conversation for you. When you're doing it from an SEO standpoint, you're framing that for other people. And it's important that you also check that and realize that you're tying into other people's frames and other people's conversations so that, you're helping them find you that way as well, right? And so in that way, a lot of that research will be like, well, if I talk about this, what's the intent behind that? How can I tie that into other kinds of SEO strategies? And what you're doing is basically all just a data classification exercise, even though we don't think or talk about it that way as a role. And the last thing I want to talk about for opportunities is this idea of capitalizing on serendipity. And so everything I've talked to you up to this point with respect to video has been about using what I would call your historical data that you already have, like your video or podcast repositories. This is a way that you can look for those opportunities that give you something that's all brand new. And it really relies on you being prepared and on the lookout for moments and having all of that network and tool set and skill set in place so that you're ready to mobilize when that moment happens. And so I'll tell you a story. Someone else in this network, Ellie Lucari of Bright Organizing Solutions, is a professional organizer. And I worked her through this exercise I do sometimes with clients and other people called strategic storytelling, which is geared towards figuring out how to define the brand concepts behind your company, and then use that to do things like vet and tailor and define products and services, how to vet clients that are in line with your brand, all sorts of things like that. And the concepts that she came up with were tailor-made, holistic, empathetic, enthusiastic, and goal-oriented. And through this exercise, we were also able to come up with this tagline of you don't need to be fixed, your space does, which is also in line, I think you can see with, the empathetic part. But, months after we did this, we happened to be a Zoom conversation and she just made some offhand comment about, hey, maybe my marketing shtick should be this. And it was like, oh my gosh, nothing you've ever said has better encapsulated these ideas of you being enthusiastic and goal-oriented than what just happened, right? And because we're part of this network and we do all this video stuff and we've got this, post-production skill, we were able to just snip that out, wrap it up, and ship it out as like a marketing video, right? And it was just, we could not have planned that. It's like the definition of serendipity, right? But you've got to have done that classification work so that you're like, oh, wow, this fits. This is the thing. And it's in line with those goals of where I want to go. I can play that for you if you want, but there are other ways you can continue the conversation with me on LinkedIn. And I also have the strategic storytelling workshop coming up for free. That'll be on Eventbrite. I'll drop all these links in the chat. But I want to kind of open it up and see if there are questions. If you want to talk about what constitutes an opportunity for you, how you frame conversations, categorizations and classifications that you're using, any kind of thing like that. I'm sure Neil will have something, even if no one else does.
I always have a few preloaded, but if anybody, if anybody has any questions for Barb, just you can raise your hand if you want. You can just open up your mic and go. And if nobody has any, I do have some, so we'll give them a shot. Barb, anybody come up with any questions based on what Barb talked about? No. All right, I will.
I can ask.
Then.
I can ask one real quick.
Got something. Go for it.
So, I just you had mentioned the blog post, the instant blog post, and transcripting. Like, what would you recommend? Any specific program for transcripting or anything like that?
So actually, there's one, Neil, we were just talking about.
I'll jump in. Yeah. So we've been moving pretty hard, Nick. I know you haven't been around quite as much in the direction of Descript is a pretty great program for transcription, and it's quick. It does a very, not a perfect job, but pretty close to perfect, and then you can clean it up a little and go from there. And you could use that content as your blog post or as inspiration for your blog post. So
yeah, and in the past I've used rev.com, and I've been really happy with them, even with a lot of the technical stuff that I do with Excel and data science. And they've got even all my capitalizations in the way they were actually supposed to be, so that was nice. And otherwise, when I feel like I've got nothing to do in front of the TV, I will go through the YouTube automated captions and spend, hours just, feeling useful, but also watching TV, cleaning that up myself. So
I would say the hierarchy is definitely Rev, Descript, YouTube, down out of frame somewhere down here. But they get some of the words right too.
So I have a question for Barb.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hi, Barb. Thank you for this. This is awesome. I have one question for you though. What do you use other than YouTube analytics, or do you know anything that will take give you a clearer vision of the data coming from a video, like how far they watch, the retention? What tools would you recommend, or what do you use currently? Is it just YouTube or?
Yeah, so for the most part, all I'm relying on there is YouTube for that kind of stuff, because it's pretty much the only place I have my videos up. But I do take a lot of the other analytics and the comments off of LinkedIn and the other things like that. LinkedIn can give you some of that in the data that you download. And then there is another service. Justin Welsh talks about it all the time, and I'm blanking on that right now too. I can look that up here in a second. And I actually dump a whole bunch of this stuff together into Excel, and I run a lot of my own analytics on that stuff. So I wish I had a better, smoother answer, but I think when you're really trying to cross-platform, a lot of that's going to have to be some sort of ad hoc Kludgy Frankenstein custom solution.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. Brian didn't know that what Barb will make her own solutions, right? So that's that was a loaded question. Analytics and figuring out what is actually going on there it's more important than what everybody typically looks at, which is just straight up views, right? So great question there.
Can I jump in
Does
real
anybody
quick?
else have one? Yeah, go for it.
Oh, so for Justin Welsh's course, I was just watching it the other day. So his website analytics is Fathom, and his LinkedIn analytics is Shield.
Yep.
So if that helps at all.
Yeah, so Shield, you've got to go through and sort of put together your own sort of swipe file in that. But once you have that data downloaded, you've got all sorts of things showing how people get to you differently. And I've noticed a difference based on how I tag things on LinkedIn. And that can also, be a big difference in terms of who responds, even though it's like the same people, I think, largely seeing that stuff. And I use the same handful of tags. It can actually make a big difference to how people are responding to that. And I think a lot of that also goes back to then how I tailor around a lot of those hashtags without really thinking about it. Because now I'm thinking about those classifications and how to promote those categories. But, and I think a lot of that too goes into those tags that you put on YouTube in terms of feeding people to those videos. I think as over time, I've gotten better at matching the intent of what's happening in the video. I've certainly seen more referral traffic to my videos as opposed to just my videos responding to my own videos and serving up my own videos. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know it depends on the player too. Because there's, I use Brightcove, not a plug or anything. It's just something that I use personally on my website. And the data that comes from Brightcove, it tells you where they fast forward, where they, how long they watch, how much time they spend on the page. I mean, it's very detailed analytics, and I'm just looking for something a little less expensive. So I'm figuring I'm going to follow you on LinkedIn just in case you come up with that answer sooner or later.
All right. I'll make a note.
Yep. There's a handful of those, right? Like Brightcove and Wistia and so on that go a lot deeper with the analytics. So yeah, excellent. I put those links that Morgan brought up from Justin Welsh in the chat if anybody's interested in that. Does anybody else have any questions? Man, it might be my chance. All right, Barb, are you ready? Okay, so here is my question. I loved the idea of doing, taking chapters, right? If you're doing long form content on YouTube and or even through most podcasting services, you have the opportunity to add chapters to your long form content, and you should be doing that, right? It helps the user jump around, and the actual video hosts, or YouTube and the hosting platforms for the podcast really like it. So because you're already doing that, because you're into best practices, and as you said, you can take that data and easily kind of figure out like, oh, look, here's a chapter about this, a chapter about this, 3 weeks in a row, chapter about this.
Right.
And you take those data points. How do you think, would you use those data points to kind of end up, I guess, going back in the direction of the blue ocean concept, right? Could you use that or think of a way that you would use those types of things to get you kind of in your own space? Or is that
right? And
hard?
so I think you definitely can. So I think a lot of that then also comes out of that conversation data. And I see it most frequently for myself when there's a mismatch between what I expect and how people actually respond. But I think, again, what you're doing is trying to tag things down into categories that maybe juxtapose things in a more novel way, right? And so, even with data classification, nobody's thinking of that as an emergency taco kit, blue ocean kind of thing, right? And so even just doing that made people stop and maybe read the rest of the title about data classification in a way that they wouldn't normally. Most of the time I say data classification and people can't run away from me quickly enough, right? And so I think there's a lot of richness in that data and how other things can be juxtaposed. And it's really a matter of you coming down and actually accurately tagging that stuff in the first place. And I think a lot of that can be our predispositions. Like, I'll pick on a conversation that, we've had in the past about hearing that people don't do so much video now that things are opening up. And, it's easy to make that about time management, but it's really more, and now I don't have to be sitting in the front of the computer so much anymore. And I just don't want to have to be in front of the computer if I don't want to be or don't have to be. Right. And so there's a thing about like, well, I was there anyway, so I was making video. Right. As opposed to it's these other things going on. Right. And so it's a priority thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, when you can listen to that and figure out really what's behind those things and now put that in a different kind of context, there's opportunity. I don't know if that really answers your question, but I would say that's that kind of blue ocean. So like, you have better things to do now, but right.
Right. But yeah, right. But this is why you would still use the medium or something that effect, right? Yeah.
But also too, I think a lot of times people think about cleaning things up in post-production, right? Mm-hmm. And you can tell from the way that they answer that, it's actually a pre-production step, right? And so a lot of that is figuring out where that disconnect is for them as well, in terms of going in and finding that opportunity. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a blue ocean per se. It can be that thing that comes up all of the time, but people always think it's this way. And now you're creating sort of this opportunity for them and a reframing for them, and using your data that way as well.
Yeah, and that kind of comes back to the most rudimentary of data collection, which is like one of the suggestions that we often give to people who are just getting started out creating video content is answer the questions that you answer all the time for your clients, right? Which is, ultimately in that same spirit there, where it's you're taking what they need to know from you and you're making it available to everybody, type of thing. So excellent. We can fit in one more question, or I can move into closing notes here, and then I'm sure Barb will be willing to stick around for some kind of after party questions if anybody has them. So if anybody has a pressing one, speak now. All right, we're gonna kind of tie it up here then. Thank you to all of you who joined us via the live stream. Again, don't miss that next meeting, which is coming up February 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern. We're kicking off our February theme of live streaming with a presentation by Chris Hughes called The Benefits of Live Streaming for Your Personal Brand. You can find a link to that event in the description of this live stream or on the vidwheel LinkedIn company page. Have a good night and happy